Hello, and welcome to Inside Influence, the show where we talk to B2B marketing insiders about what's working and what's not in the world of B2B influencer marketing. I'm Lee Oden, CEO and co-founder of Top Rank Marketing, and today I'm talking with Garnor Morantes, Group Marketing Manager at LinkedIn. Welcome, Garnor.
Thanks for having me, Lee.
It's great to have you here. So tell us a little bit about the kind of work that you're doing at LinkedIn.
Yeah. I have a really fun job at LinkedIn. I get to work in what's called community marketing. And what that means is our team in supporting both our LinkedIn Sales Solution and LinkedIn Marketing Solutions business, we get to go out and really build relationships with communities that matter for our businesses to really help go out and tell our messages. It's probably the best way to put it. Communities being folks like customer advocates. So you think of people who will give you the time and really lend their expertise to do case studies with you or participate in customer advisory boards. Our team runs those. Analysts at some of the top research firms, folks who are going to be writing about your business, talking about your areas of what you sell and the services you provide, and then influencers, which is what we'll be talking about today. So we get to manage that program and find really what are some ways that we can enhance those relationships and get the story out there.
Fantastic. Awesome. So I really appreciate you sharing your expertise in our 2020 State of B2B Influencer Marketing Report, the very first report dedicated to B2B influencer marketing. It's really been well received and it's driven a lot of interesting conversations, including what type of influencer program or model you might take, campaigns versus always on as an example. And on that topic of always on, of course, I want to ask you, if you had to explain always on to someone who wasn't familiar, how would you describe that? What does that mean in terms of influence?
Yeah, I think, for us, as we think about always on as a strategy, and I think the biggest thing that comes to mind is that the work that we're doing with influencers is not centered around campaigns, it's centered around relationships. It is probably one way to put it. And what I mean by that is, as we think about who we want to be working with, who can potentially tell our story and who we want to engage with, it's about building that relationship, finding people that are going to, get mutual benefit out of this relationship. And as a result, we can have that type of engagement that isn't just centered around these different points in time, which I would consider more of a campaign-based strategy. The other thing I think about when it's always on is really, are you activating this program through some channels that are always on? For us, it's our blog and our social channels, and those are 24/7. So I think that's another way that you can think about an always on type of strategy.
Awesome. Something I've heard consistently from top marketers, especially when it comes to influence, something you just said, and that is it's a mutually beneficial relationship. They seem to emphasize that. And also the word relationship is paramount and seems to be consistent among some of the top marketers that are engaging in working with influencers. Many B2B marketers approach influencer marketing, as we mentioned, as a standalone campaign, right? This is a tempting thing. Maybe it's a pilot, maybe it's an experiment, maybe it's just, we're not confident quite yet, and that's okay. In our 2020 State of B2B Influencer Marketing Report, we found that 12 times as many marketers that are running always-on programs were very successful versus those who are doing intermittent campaigns. So I'm curious about your opinion in terms of what do you think that those campaign-based marketers need to know about and understand about always-on?
Yeah, I think it could be a bit of a perception that always on means you have to be always on as a marketer. I think that could be a bit of what can be intimidating and overwhelming as you think about how to get this going from the start and to launch this type of a strategy in a program. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think by always on, yes, it means that there's some activity that's consistently happening. Yes, it means you're monitoring and working through channels that, as I mentioned, are always on. But I don't think it means that you necessarily as a marketer are going to have to be doing unique new ad hoc campaigns on a daily basis. That's really not what it's about, at least for us. There's something about oversaturation, about fatigue. You don't want to do that on either end. We don't want to do that to the influencers that we work with. They have their own businesses. They have their own objectives and goals over the year. We're just trying to be respectful of that and be a participant in it, as opposed to having them do the LinkedIn strategy. That's not what it's about.
Well, at LinkedIn Marketing and Sales, you've taken an always-on approach, of course, and you've had some great results in terms of reach and engagement. Can you share a little bit about your objectives for this approach and the approach itself?
Sure. Yeah. Our objectives, as we think about the influencer program, this is where it works really well in concert with our other programs or other communities, as I mentioned, customer advocates and even analysts, industry analysts, is really we want to leverage and work with the influencer program in a way that it is able to take the messages that we want to deliver as a brand, as a business unit for sales solutions and marketing solutions, and empower those influencers to tell that story as well. Now, they, again, as I mentioned earlier, they have their own story to tell, their own brand and their own narrative. So ideally, we're finding influencers who are already aligned with that message and that story. But the objective is to make sure that they know what ours is, that that they're familiar with it, that they can lend input into it as well, because they are the experts in many instances. They're the feet on the ground who are talking to the marketers on a daily basis, talking to the sellers. And so we want that feedback, that input into it. So the objective is equal, gathering that input, getting better at telling our story and developing our products and services, while at the same time empowering a set of advocates or people out there who have large followings or are developing followings or are just experts in their field to tell that story as well. That at a real high level, that's really the objectives that we set about trying to meet as we started to develop these programs. And we do that by ways of really keeping an eye out for content that influencers might be creating that supports the messages that we're telling. At the same time, an occasion, yes, creating some new campaigns in which we can arm these influencers with more information, with some assets that tell this story that we want to put out there, create some new content around that, and have them be a key part of that delivery and that content creation at the same time.
Awesome. In the report, the B2B Influencer Marketing Report, you mentioned, I thought, something that was pretty compelling. When urgency strikes, we've been able to immediately activate influencers. I'm curious, do you have any examples or scenarios that you can share where you've been able to do that, or a scenario where it would make sense to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned, the value that can be obtained from these relationships in the form of the input that you get for your ideas as a brand. And so one of the best examples I think of when it comes to that urgency and being able to get that type of dialogue going is, I came up with an idea, and I won't tell you what it is because it wasn't a very good one. But I ran it by our team internally. Our team, maybe they were just being polite, but they said, yeah, that sounds like an interesting idea. Why don't we run it by some of the influencers that you all have relationships with? And Lee, in a matter of a few hours, I was able to have 4 calls directly with some of our most important influencers to run this idea by them. And long story short, it was a bad idea. They told me it was a bad idea. And I would have never been able to get that quick turnaround on something that I was ready to start spending some time on and maybe activating some other teams on if I didn't have those relationships. That's one example. I think another example is with such a large organization as LinkedIn, and I'm sure a lot of your clients and other customers see this as well, is you're not always privy to what other teams within your organization might be getting out there. And so we have had instances where some really amazing work has gone live and gone public, work that really is that we love and we want to share. And it's a quick thing for me to forward that on to some influencers, give them a heads up, and just give them the option of sharing, of commenting, of just putting it on their radar. That happens all the time, and that's something that's not planned. And you want to be timely and get it out urgently, and it happens like that.
And that's really facilitated by the fact that you have relationships with these people right now, right? They're alive. These are living, dynamic relationships with people. And it's not like so often that happens. Hey, we've got this really cool thing we're proud of. Now let's go find someone to help us promote it.
Yeah, exactly.
The worst analogy I have for that is the best day to raise an army is not the first day of the war. So anyways, on to better things, more positive. On top of the challenges cited by one of the top challenges cited by marketers is the ability to find and qualify influencers. And in the research that we did, we found that none of the B2B marketers that are implementing always-on programs found it very difficult to find the right influencers. I mean, it was literally 0%. I'm curious, why do you think an always-on approach makes influencer identification and activation easier, more effective? Or, I mean, what do you think the secret sauce is there?
I think it does make it easier. And, I think as you've seen in the results from the report, I think it makes them more effective as well. Why that is the case, I think it's mostly because as an always-on program, you're part of the conversation. And because you're part of the conversation, you are able to notice what's going on out there. You're able to see who else, from an influencer standpoint, is a part of the conversation. And I think then it makes that piece of it really, I wouldn't say easy, but easier, as you're seeing, okay, this person is at these types of events, I'm seeing them come up on LinkedIn quite a bit, or this person is sharing this type of information on Twitter or through LinkedIn, and it's consistent over time, and it's messages, it's events that we are at, it's messages that we're also saying as you're talking about the new sales strategies or digital marketing, whatever it may be. And so those faces and those names just naturally come up. To be honest with you, I think that's part of what happens there. And yeah, I think you also, as a brand, you are not a passive participant in that, you're an active one. And because of that, on the other flip side is the influencers know who you are. And as a result, when you do that outreach, yes, it helps to have the LinkedIn logo behind me when I'm doing that outreach. But even if I didn't, if they see that I'm out there, if they see that I'm talking about the same types of things that are important to them, then that connection at least gets a little bit, you get one step closer to making that connection.
Yeah, the market's a lot warmer.
Right.
Absolutely. I think we've seen a lot of press in the last couple of years, the business media talking about customer experience being a top priority for B2B organizations. And one could argue that influence can play a pretty important role in delivering a better customer experience. One of the key findings that was revealed in our research was that 74% of marketers agreed that influencer marketing improves customer and prospect experience with a brand. I'm curious, how does LinkedIn work with influencers to create better customer experiences?
Yeah, I'm not surprised by those statistics. So much of your success as a B2B organization, and especially when you're selling, in our case, whether it's a sales navigator or ad products and our ad solutions through marketing solutions business, so much of the success of our customers comes down to adoption and usage, right? And not every customer is just, and this is the case for all companies, how does every customer get their own CS manager? And that's just not, it's just not the way it's going to boil down to it. So, I think the ways that influencers support this, a lot of times, and we've seen this, I guess some great examples of it, is in sharing best practices and sharing, their own version of success using your product. One of the best examples we had of this just recently is a couple of influencers that we know and that we work with. They got together, we helped make the connection, but they got together to host their own webinar to their audiences, uh, you know, which was about LinkedIn Sales Navigator. Now, we helped them along the way. We did a briefing to show them the latest products and features within that and how to use them. So there were some new things that came up for them there, but they were answering questions that they were feeling from their constituents, from their audience. And it was a tremendous success. And they had a ton of participants on that call. And look, they were out there doing this to help, you know, it helped all parties. Obviously, it helps
Right.
LinkedIn, but you're able at that point to improve the customer experience by helping these customers who might already be using Sales Navigator learn how to use it better, and really learn some of those best practices that some of these hands-on users, influencers in this case, are taking advantage of. So I think that's one way
Mm-hmm.
that they are improving the customer experience. I think, you know, we think about the customer experience as being something that, you know, even before the sale, that they can be your customer, they can be your buyer, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what buyers are doing today. Buyers are looking for other sources of information. They're going to their peers. They're going to LinkedIn. They're looking at the content and what some of these influencers in some cases are saying around your brand, around your products and services. And if you have those influencers, yeah, telling the message and knowing your brand and your products and services, that's improving that buyer experience, is putting them first in that lineup.
Excellent. Yeah, of course I'm biased, but I agree that influence does play a role across the entire customer lifecycle, because it, you know, adds reach, you know, creates better awareness around good ideas that are useful. And of course, these folks are influential because they do have domain expertise. So they do have best
Right.
practices, and they are
Right.
practitioners in many cases. So the advice they're giving in the context of the brand is actionable. It's
Correct.
actually useful. Wow. Almost made up a word there.
Yeah.
So we can switch gears a little bit. I think talk
Sure.
about the pandemic, or not about the pandemic, but with the pandemic, and so many other changes that are happening right now, socially, politically, even environmentally. That it's an uncertain time in business, and to some degree for marketers too. And I'm curious if you feel that there are any advantages for brands, B2B brands, to work with
Mm.
influencers in times of uncertainty.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it does. And you know, I think in a time of like you said, so much going on. I think, and there's, you know, a lot of divisiveness that can take place as well. I think the benefit of working with the influencers is a lot of times they have such a closer ear to the ground than you might have as your brand. Yes, you can do your voice of customer studies, and you can do, you know, you can do your own monitoring of LinkedIn. Uh, but a lot of times these influencers, they're talking to the buyers, and they're talking to them on a daily basis, as whether it be as consultants, as speakers, whatever it might be. And I think that they can have a great perspective. And this is getting back to that value of the input that we get from influencers, that we just hold very dear. So I think that that's one way that if you do have these relationships, have this type of program, you have an ear to the ground, and that's you know, that should not be that should not be something you take for granted. Um, you know, I think another benefit to working with influencers, and this is a bit of, I think if you set up your influencer program in a way that I'm happy to say we have, of looking for a diverse group and really getting a great representation, or a good enough representation of, you know, a diverse set of constituents, and even you know, what people look like and how they talk. Um, that can help in times of uncertainty like this. And
Yeah.
we've seen that when we can talk to someone from, you know, this side of society, but if we have an influencer who can also, you know, talk to a different set of customers, whether it's based on racial, ethnicity, or other areas, I think that's only going to make us better and make us more sensitive to what is going on out there and how our messages might be received.
Excellent. So it's not all roses, of course.
Yeah,
Working with influencers, they are human beings, and humans
yeah,
are interesting entities. So I'm curious what you think some of the top challenges are working with B2B influencers today.
yeah. Well, I'll go back to the last question you asked around, what's going on within society, and really, I think that backdrop that we all need to heavily consider with anything that we're doing these days. And I think that there is that risk as you put your message and your brand in the hands of someone else. What happens if that person says something that is not, in alignment with your brand, or, you might not have put out there as a message, but comes from somebody else, and hey, they're an influencer, so, they can say whatever they want in many instances. So I think there's a bit of that risk. There's a bit of that challenge. I think for us, we have really placed a ton of emphasis on developing the trust and developing the relationship with these folks, with these influencers, that we feel pretty good about it. We
Yeah.
feel pretty good about where we stand. We feel pretty good about the messages that they're going to deliver, what they're going to say. But yeah, that's a challenge, that's a risk. And then I think another challenge is one that you also mentioned earlier, is how do you find the right influencers? There's so many people out there purporting to be experts. How do you find the right ones? And we already talked about some of the ways to do that and being a more active part of the conversation, but that's a tough one for sure.
Let's talk about the future of B2B influencer marketing. I'm curious what you think 2021 is going to look like. What do you think will be different next year when it comes to working with influencers in the business sense?
I think you're going to see a more diverse set of faces out there within your stable of influencers, and I think
Yes.
that that's a great thing. I think
Yeah.
that that's, we'll all look back and say this is a long time in coming, but it
Yes.
really is. And I think that that's not just important from the standpoint of, I think catching us up in a way, but I think it's also important because we think about the young marketers and the young sellers, when you think about our business and what we do, they need to see more faces like theirs out there, and they need to hear more of that perspective. And we just have been missing it for a long time. And so I think you're going to see a lot of that coming into 2021. I think you'll also see a focus, and we've already started to see this over recent past, but even more so on just true meaningful engagement with these influencers, less campaign focus, more always on.
Mm-hmm.
And are you finding and working with influencers in ways that are going to benefit them? And it's not just hey, we have a campaign, we need you to go out and talk about LinkedIn for 2 weeks. That's not what it's about. Are you doing meaningful engagements from the standpoint of involving them in the creative process, involving them in developing the messaging, them being the influencers, making them really a part of that? Because guess what? Not only does it make them feel more involved, but it also makes your efforts that much better because of all the stuff that we talked about before.
Yep.
And then I think probably the last one that I think about is really, and we don't have the answer to this, but I think those programs and those influencers that we're going to see more of are those who can adapt to the landscape that's just changing on a daily basis. That's a hard thing to do. I mean, it's hard for any of us, but I don't fancy an influencer who is trying to think about the next 6 months, because that's what we look to them for, right? But I don't envy them for having to try and think about that, have that forward-looking perspective when things are changing so rapidly. So I think the ones who can do that well, I think are going to be the ones that you start to see more of as well.
Excellent. So on the brand side of things, there's a lot of up and coming in-house talent. You mentioned, those marketers and sales professionals. also. And you talked about, it'd be great for them to see more of people that look like them, and there's people they aspire
Yeah.
to being mentors, people that they really are looking to for direction. And I think there are some rising stars in the realm of influencer marketing from a practitioner standpoint, from the brand perspective. And I'm curious if there's anyone that you feel would be a rising star, either at LinkedIn or at another company that is doing this.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think, our whole team. I wouldn't be a good teammate if I didn't say our whole Marcon team people were like stars. But I firmly believe that. I think we're talking about some really smart people
Yes.
doing some really great things. But when I think about cross-functional teams, for example, that we work with in this capacity, that we think about as influencers on their own, we are seeing a lot of them come up internally on the sales side of our business,
Mm-hmm.
and some people that we're really excited about. I think one person that we've uh, been doing a bit more of. He put out a pretty provocative blog post at the time when Black Lives Matter was really starting to gain notoriety, and his name is Kwesi Graves, and we put him on. He hosted one of our live with sales leaders as well, and it's just a great. He has a great perspective on sales. He has a great perspective on sure the role that diversity plays, but I think more importantly, he's an expert in his field. He's a rising star and one that we're taking a look at and definitely trying to do more with. There's other folks within our sales leadership that have just been doing more and more recently, like Alyssa Merwin, who I think is just a great spokesperson as it relates to being an influencer. She's,
Mm-hmm.
you know, she's a female leader in sales. She's done a great job at spearheading and helping lead the charge for Sales Navigator. And that's someone that really stands out for us as well. And then on the marketing side, yeah, there's a whole host of folks. Ty Heath is one that always comes to mind for
Yes,
me.
Ty.
Yeah, I've worked with Ty quite a bit, and Ty is just a stud. I mean, I think someone who is just, so well versed in marketing overall, but then is able to bring that LinkedIn perspective and just she owns a room when she steps into it, and I think that's something that always you look for in your influencers. Are there people who are just gonna grab that attention? And she's one of them for sure.
Fantastic. Great examples. So we'll finish off with this question. We have found that the number of B2B brands that are considering influencer marketing or elevating their efforts with influencer marketing has actually increased over the last 6 months. Now, at the same time, our research found that 60% of marketers don't feel they have the right skills or in-house capabilities to execute. I'm curious, what advice could you share with marketers that are considering, influencer marketing as something that they're investigating, something that they want to either do brand new or take whatever it is that they happen to be doing accidentally to the next level?
Yeah, I think the advice that I would give is, take a moment to step back and not think of it as an influencer program, and think of it more as what is helpful for your buyers, what is important for your buyers, and what could they benefit from. And what I mean when you stop and take a look at that, what I mean by it is, then you start thinking about who that audience truly is, and as a result, who might be able to speak to them better than you can. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, if you think about our business lines, the ones that I support, we're talking about marketers and we're talking about sellers. Well, yes, I work in marketing, but I don't have the necessary experience and the skill set that I think a lot of these marketers are asking, what they're asking for. And so then you start to take a look at, what are they asking for? What are those conversations? And who is a part of that conversation? And can we have a relationship with them? I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a place to start. It removes some of the, I think the overwhelming nature of what setting up an influencer program can be. If you just think about, hey, who are the sales leaders and people who are experts in sales that I should be talking to, because that's who that's my end goal, is to talk to sellers. Let
Right.
me start there. Let me build a relationship with them. Let me see what they need and what they have to offer, what I can offer them. And I think that kind of can do some of the upfront work of identification of influencers, and also, what ultimate outputs and methodologies and processes are going to work best, because it just happens through those discussions and through those relationships. So I think that that's one way to kind of think about it. That's some advice that I would give.
Super. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, your expertise. You're, of course, a joy to work with, and you're even just as good or better to interview. So I really appreciate it.